extraneous material on the subject of this special order. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognized the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert. Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate so much my dear friend Mr. Perry's last hour almost talking about such an important issue. I know there are those who say the #1 job of Congress is to create jobs, but I think a more appropriate reading of our constitutional duties is #1, we're supposed to provide for the common defense, and every American should do as George Washington prayed that we would, to never forget those who have served in the field. And that includes, that is our military men and women, some of whom have given all, but all gave something. That was Washington's prayer at the end of his resignation as he resigned as commander of the Revolutionary Forces, something that had never been done before, and to my understanding has not happened since. As a leader in the Maldives Islands said a few years ago, unsolicited, he said, "We have never had a George Washington to set the proper example, so we're always worried about a military coup," and unfortunately we've had one. But what a blessed nation we are, because people like Washington, who were raised up for such a time as they were in, and Abraham Lincoln, speaking more than once so eloquently about the need to help those who have served and their widows and orphans. So it is particularly dismaying when Congress passes anything that does not properly honor and address the issues of those who have served in the field, and as we've talked about before, follow up and fulfill our obligation to keep our promises. This government promises individuals, if you come into the military and you serve till retirement, here's what you will get in return. We should not break our promises to those who have served, risked life and limb to protect us. And just as my friend Marcus Luttrell said recently on CNN, basically that they didn't go on the mission in Afghanistan senselessly, that it's not senseless when someone hears the call, receives the order of his country, and acts in accordance with their orders, win, lose, or draw. And that's the mentality. My 4 years in the Army, probably 2.5 was under Commander Jimmy Carter, and 1.5 under Commander-in-Chief Ronald Reagan. The last 1.5 was far better because we had a Commander-in-Chief that truly appreciated more the opinion of those who were serving in the field and restored honor for the military. President Carter, obviously, from his background, had respect, but you sure couldn't tell it from the actions when we were in the military. And as a result, our reputation suffered around the world. And we had an active war on our embassy in Tehran, and other than a scaled-back rescue attempt, scaled back by the White We were embarrassed. And it's still used for recruiting today among radical extremists, Muslim Brother members abroad who say these guys don't have the backbone to do what's necessary to win. And in such an important time in this world where so much is at risk, to have an administration and some in the House or Senate that think it's okay to break our word to our military, we've got to turn this around. To those who think it's okay, we need to make clear, Mr. Speaker, it's not okay. We have the moral obligation to keep our promises and to do everything we can to protect those who are protecting us and to never send them into harm's way unless they've been given authority to win. That should have been the lesson learned from Vietnam that wasn't learned. The lesson was not that we couldn't win, we could. And as Sam Johnson says in his book, points out in person, after his 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, much of it in complete isolation, brutally treated, after carpet bombing North Vietnam for 2 weeks, which could have happened many years before and ended the war early, a vindictive commander at the Hanoi Hilton laughing, saying, in effect, you stupid Americans, if you just bombed us for 1 more week, we would have had to surrender unconditionally. So it should be. We should not get involved anywhere where we do not give full authority to those in our military to go, kick rear ends, win, and then come home. And in an article today by Christina Wong from The Hill publication, headline, Pentagon's hands tied on hunting down Benghazi attackers. This article says the U.S. military cannot hunt down and kill people responsible for the deadly 2012 attack on an American compound in Benghazi, Libya, as long as the terrorists are not officially deemed members or affiliates of al-Qaeda. Newly declassified transcripts from congressional hearings show. This article goes on. Thank you. This article goes on to say, quote, in other words, they don't fall under the AUMF, that stands for Authorized Use of Military Force, authorized by the Congress of the United States, so we would not have the capacity to simply find them and kill them either with a remotely piloted aircraft or with an assault on the ground, unquote, Dempsey said. They're talking about General Dempsey in his testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. And those were the transcripts that were released. But he's chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. And here's where I've become amazed how this administration could think that the AUMF somehow gives this president authority without consulting Congress to go over and bomb and have our military play an active role in taking out Gaddafi, provide weapons to Libyans who very well may have been used to help attack our consulate, by the way, in Benghazi. We don't know enough to know for sure, but good chance we were giving them weapons. But how this president, this administration thinks you can go over and go to war against Gaddafi, who had become an ally after he got scared enough after the invasion of Iraq that he just opened up all of his weapon systems, became an ally, and as some moderate Muslim leaders in the Middle East have said to me, he wasn't a good guy, but he was one of your good friends after he got scared of you in 2003. And some have said he was doing more to help fight terrorism in that part of the world than anybody besides Israel, and yet you bomb him, you give weapons to go against him. We don't understand you. But this administration felt like under the AUMF, it had full authority to go in and attack a place where even the Secretary of Defense said we have no national security interest in Libya. Oh, sure, the Organization of Islamic Council, the 57 states that make up that organization, sometimes confused with the 50 states we have here in America, but that 57 states that make up the OIC, they wanted us to go in and take out Gaddafi because they didn't like him, because he was fighting terrorism and radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood. But how would an administration, how would a commander-in-chief have authority to go in Libya, and then when we find out there are people that still want to destroy America, kill Americans, destroy our way of life, all of a sudden you say, but we don't really have authority to go after people who have declared war on us, have committed an act of war and attacking our embassy, but we're just not sure we can go after them. That did not seem to stop this administration and the President from issuing an order to murder, to kill a guy I wasn't a fan of, Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S. citizen, because his parents came over on a visa. He was born here and then went back and was taught to hate America. Even though earlier, even during the Bush administration, he came to Capitol Hill, led congressional Muslim staffers in prayer here on Capitol Hill, even though he had contacts within this administration, visited with people in this administration's government. For some reason, didn't see the need to arrest him and put him on trial here in America, but they thought it'd be better just to hit him with a drone attack in Yemen and kill him over there. And I'm not finding fault necessarily. That's a different debate over whether the President should order a drone attack on an American citizen without a trial. My point is, if this administration felt like the AUMF, the Authorization of Uniform Military Force, that allowed him to take out an American citizen in Yemen, then how is it this administration all of a sudden gets scared and says, gee, we might violate the AUMF if we go after the people that killed our ambassador in an act of war against U.S. property, which was our consulate in Benghazi. And I think it's helpful to read directly from the language. And it's something I was extremely concerned about, and a number of my friends here have been extremely concerned about. It's why we have pushed amendments to rein in the presidential authority to go after American citizens. And we've worked on language, passed language to affect this, to prevent any U.S. president, whether it was former President Bush while he was still president, or this president, or future president, it would prevent them from being able to just arrest an American citizen and hold them indefinitely. We put restraints on the president. But here's the language that now General Dempsey and this administration say we just don't really have the authority under the AUMF to go after the guys that assassinated our ambassador and killed 3 others, including 2 former Navy SEALs, and took much of the leg of a former Army Ranger that was on the rooftop with Ty Woods and Glenn Darty. But here's the language. says that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. So we've had people that took that and said, gee, you know, yeah, Al-Awlaki didn't help plan 2001's 9/11 attack. In fact, we had him around Washington leading prayers here on Capitol Hill, having contacts with this administration. Gee, they didn't have a problem using this language to kill an American citizen in Yemen, not because he participated or helped plan 9/11-2001, but simply because they were using language here in the last part that or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations. So that's been interpreted by this administration for a long time now. Gee, you didn't have to participate or help plan 9/11-2001, but if you did anything to aid, abet, assist, encourage in any way any of these organizations that may have participated in some way in 9/11-2001, then the President can do whatever he needs to with military force to, as it says, prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Well, if Al-Awlaki could have this language used to take him out with a drone attack, then that certainly, under this administration's definition and usage of that language, sure ought to authorize them to go after people that declared war on us and committed an act of war against our enemy or harbored such persons or organizations. And we already know, everybody but the New York Times, everybody knows that the organizations, that some of the organizations that participated in the 9/11-2012 attack, the act of war on our consulate in Benghazi, were affiliated with Al-Qaeda, organization that did participate in 9/11. So these organizations didn't necessarily participate in 9/11 in 2001, but they certainly were working with them. So anyway, it just seems to be contradictory for the administration to use the AUMF to possibly exceed their authority to kill people abroad and then turn around and hide behind it. And perhaps if Dr. Gates had not written the book he did and given us insight into things that are said or not said in this administration, then maybe we wouldn't know as much. But since we now know that even a Secretary of Defense and our top generals can feel the President's doing the wrong thing but not have the guts to tell him to his face, then I don't know, perhaps possibly General Dempsey's in that category now. Maybe he's one of those that fits in the category of maybe knowing something is appropriate, but instead popping those heels together, salute, yes sir, and never fulfilling their duty, not just to follow orders, but to give helpful information to a commander above you, in this case, the Commander-in-Chief. This article says the U.S. could seek to capture the Benghazi attackers under the existing AUMF, but it would need to rely on forces in Libya or any other countries where the attackers are hiding to do so. Well, isn't that interesting? Because That's not what this president did to kill Al-Awlaki. Anwar al-Awlaki just killed him. Didn't rely on any Yemen force or anybody else. Just took him out with one of our drones bombs. And now all of a sudden they want to hide behind this language and say, oh, well, actually we can't do that. And so is that our excuse now for why after a year and a half? And I feel sorry for the president because basically he wasn't going to rest till we got these guys. And so, man, a year and a half is a long time not to rest. This article says Dempsey's classified comments highlight the limits of the existing authority, which was proved by Congress after September 11, 2001 attacks, and the difficulty of fighting a constantly evolving enemy that in al-Qaeda has inspired independent terrorist groups to try and murder American forces and civilians. The AUMF gives the military authority to hunt and kill those responsible for the 2001 attacks wherever they are, and has allowed President Obama to authorize hundreds of drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Libya. It's also been used to authorize several special operations raids, such as the one that took out Osama bin Laden. But see, the article just accepts what the administration says. General Dempsey said, apparently in his testimony, oh, well, gee, apparently you can go after all these other people. Well, now, if you can go after them, you can use the same language to go after the perpetrators of 9/11. So what's the administration afraid of? I keep wanting these questions asked, and I think we need a select committee to ask these questions. Why don't you just come forward, all those in the administration that have information? Why do you keep polygraphing our intelligence agents who knew what went on in Libya and what was going on in Libya? Why do you keep polygraphing them and make sure they're not talking to Congress or somebody else? Why don't you just let them tell members of Congress so we have better information from which we can authorize other actions and appropriate money to help with those actions? Why don't you just come forward, tell us what was going on? Why don't you try for a change being the most transparent administration in history? Long way to go, but maybe it's time to start. But we're in a war, and as others have so appropriately said, apparently we've been in a war since 1979 when radical Islamists committed the act of war against American property, which an embassy belongs to the country, and the soil is considered to be the country's that occupies that embassy. You commit an act against that, military act, hostile act, it's an act of war. So we've been at war since 1979. Trouble is, until 9/11/2001, most Americans didn't know we were in a war. Only one side knew we were in a war. And that was borne out in 1983 when our Marines, over 200 Marines, were killed in Beirut by bombing, the truck bombing that came in there. So many acts of war, of violence, including 1993 World Trade Center bombing, including the two embassies that were bombed under the Clinton administration. Although perhaps some in the administration might be tempted to ask, as Secretary Clinton asked not that long ago, what difference at this point does it make how or why they were killed, basically, in those embassies? Well, it makes a difference because we could prevent them in the future if we know why they were killed and what went wrong in the present. But it's a mystery. Why hide behind the same AUMF as an excuse not to have brought the assassins of our ambassador to justice? And something I heard a former JAG officer talking on Fox News one night this week, obviously a smart man, but an ignorant man. You can be smart and be ignorant. He was ignorant of the Constitution because he seemed to think that the Constitution requires you capture someone who has declared war on you, you know, you got to give them all kinds of access and let them send manifestos around. You got to give them all kinds of freedom, and that's simply not the case. Some people that mean well but are ignorant of the Constitution and its applications say everybody has to be treated exactly the same under the Constitution. Their constitutional rights mean this or that, not understanding that actually under the Constitution everybody's not entitled to the same court. They're entitled to due process, but constitutionally that means different things. So in the Army, in the military, I say the Army because that's what I was in, but in the military, constitutional rights are different. So you don't have the right to freedom of assembly. I wanted to claim that many times. We were ordered to be out for a 5 a.m. forced 25-mile march. I wanted to claim, sir, I have a right to freedom of assembly wherever and whenever I want, and I'd just rather not assemble for this 25-mile forced march. Or the, I can't remember now, 2 5-mile runs, whatever we used to do, early in the morning before you even started the day. Would have been nice to say, no, I don't. It would have been nice to have freedom of speech so that as a member of the military, we could have said what we really thought about some of President Carter's orders, but he was commander-in-chief. And as it should be, you're not allowed when you're in active duty military to publicly criticize your command chain. And in order to have good order and discipline, that's the way it needs to be. But once you're not on active duty, you can say whatever you want. Should be able to without worrying about a drone taking you out. So constitutional rights are different when you're in the military. Constitution also makes clear that Congress has the authority to set up the disciplinary procedures, the court systems, tribunals for the military. Makes clear that Congress has the authority to set up different courts for immigration purposes, entirely constitutional. So I get amused when some people that are smart but ignorant about the Constitution start saying everybody in America has a constitutional right to be tried before a United States District Court. Well, that's ridiculous. There's not a U.S. District Court that's even established in the Constitution. That's completely up to Congress. This Congress has the authority to get rid of every district court in America, get rid of every federal court of appeals in America, and just set up a whole new system. We have the authority to do that. As Professor David Gwynn used to say, there's only one court established in the Constitution. All others owe their existence, their jurisdiction, their very being to Congress. As Bill Cosby said, used to say, his daddy told him and his little brother, I brought you into this world and I can take you out. Well, Congress brought these courts into this world, and Congress can remove them. We have that authority. So nobody has a constitutional right to U.S. District Court. There is no constitutional creation of a U.S. District Court. It's up to Congress. So to have some former JAG officer go on TV and say, oh, yeah, you got to give all these rights. No, you don't. Under our Constitution, if you declare war against the United States, we have every right, if we capture you, to hold you until the cessation, the stopping of the hostility, the war that you declared against us. And then once the war's over, we don't have to try you. Convince your buddy, we'll let you send a letter to your buddies telling them stop the war so I can be released as a POW. We don't have to release them if they're a part of a group at war with us. And then when the end of the hostilities comes and the war is over, then you don't even have to release everybody that was a POW. If somebody you believe has probable cause, is a good standard, to believe they committed a war crime, then instead of just releasing them, send them home, you can try them for the war crime. But I understand there are a lot of people in this administration that don't really understand that part of the Constitution. Perhaps they got a bad professor at University of Chicago Law School or somewhere, and they don't really understand what the Constitution actually says and doesn't say. But you can hold people indefinitely, and the Supreme Court verified that. You may have to give them a writ of habeas corpus hearing, but you don't have to let them go or send manifestos. We owe an obligation to protect this country. We have the authority to do it here in Congress. And Mr. Speaker, that's what we should do. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition for a new motion?
At this time, I would move that we do now hereby adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 1:00 p.m. tomorrow.
Members today approved a bill that would require the Health and Human Services Department